Gyarados, the powerful serpentine dragon Pokemon, my personal favorite Pokemon, an evolution of one of the weakest Pokemon in existence, Magikarp. I'm sure a lot of you, including me, bought Magikarp for the first time for 500 Pokédollars from that shady man in the Mount Moon Pokemon Center. As such, some of you may have ditched the useless little fish, but others tried to level it up and eventually your hard work paid off. Gyarados is definitely representative of those who are born with no natural talent but achieve greatness through hard work in the future. But how good was Gyarados actually in competitive play throughout the years? Let's find out! In this video, I will be going over these popular competitive formats. In Gen 1, Gyarados had the second highest base stat total of non-legendary Pokemon behind Dragonite. Thanks to Special being all one stat, Gyarados could actually utilize its stab well because its Special was base 100. For more details on the Special stat, you can check out my Gen 1 Battling Explained video in the description down below. Also, thanks to its Special stat, it could utilize moves like Blizzard and Thunderbolt, allowing for maximum coverage at the time. Combined with its high base 125 attack stat and the move Hyper Beam, Gyarados was certainly a powerhouse. This is what also set it apart from other commonly used top-tiered water Pokemon like Lapras and Starmie, because its attack stat allowed it to hit other special users like Alakazam and Chansey a lot harder than they could. Unfortunately, there were so many faster Pokemon that could utilize electric moves like Thunderbolt, which Gyarados is 4 times weak to, being water and flying type. The aforementioned Starmie and Lapras, as well as Gengar, who all had higher specials and access to Thunderbolt. Unfortunately, Gyarados' usage was quite mediocre back then due to this. Alright, Gen 2. Gyarados did not appreciate Special being split up into 2 stats since its base special attack was now 60 instead of 100 like in Gen 1. Though the move Hidden Power allowed it for a bit more versatility, it was overshadowed by a lot of other Pokemon with decent bulk and high attack. Without Hyper Beam, Double Edge became one of its strongest moves. Though Gyarados was a decent answer to Venusaur, its weakness to electric moves really hindered it, especially against bulky Pokemon with access to them like Porygon 2 and its mortal enemy Zapdos. And yes, you're going to hear Zapdos a lot throughout this video, because Zapdos could outspeed and vaporize Gyarados with an electric move. Unfortunately, Gyarados was barely used due to its inability to utilize its stab moves and its major electric weakness. But that's okay, because in Gen 3, Gyarados became one of the best sweepers in the game thanks to the introduction of the move Dragon Dance. This and its ability Intimidate made Gyarados a major threat during this time, though it only got access to one of its stab in the form of Hidden Power Flying. At least in the physical sets, it still had great matchups versus other water Pokemon as well as fighting types. Once it switches in thanks to Intimidate, it lowers the attack of its opponent. It can taunt walls to stop their shenanigans and proceed to set up for a sweep. Unfortunately again, its mortal enemy Zapdos was also very common in the meta. Zapdos not only resisted its Hidden Power Flying, but was immune to Earthquake, which allowed it to take hits from Gyarados and destroy it with an electric move. Though Hidden Power Rock is also an option and can hit Zapdos super effectively, it is not as good as Hidden Power Flying against other common Pokemon. To a lesser extent, Jolteon for its high speed and electric moves check Gyarados, but can't switch in safely. Other checks include Skarmory for its defenses and Weezing, however they fear the special attacking set and Taunt of course. So aside from Zapdos, Gyarados became one of the most notable Pokemon in the tier so long as it doesn't get hit by electric moves. In Gen 4, Gyarados was still a major threat in the meta as a sweeper once again. Thanks to the physical and special split with moves, Gyarados finally got its physical water stab move in the form of Waterfall, which also has the added bonus of a 20% flinch rate. In addition to this, it got access to Stone Edge, and combined with Earthquake, Gyarados had remarkable coverage. Stone Edge allowed it to hit Zapdos, Dragonite, and other Gyarados, provided it didn't miss of course. Earthquake let it hit common steel types like Empoleon, Magnezone, and Metagross. Also, thanks to its decent defensive stats, Gyarados could switch in with Intimidate on most water, fighting, bug, fire, steel, and ground type Pokemon and start setting up. There were many Gyarados sets used by players, so it really depended on what the team needed, since it could be played bulky, offensively, or with more utility moves. However, before it sets up is when it's at its weakest. Bulky Pokemon like Suicune, Vaporeon, Skarmory, Fortress, and Dusknoir could stop it, phase it, or burn it. Users of Gyarados needed to beware, as Stealth Rocks does 25% damage to Gyarados upon switching. Porygon 2 once again was also a nuisance versus Gyarados, as it could copy its Intimidate with Trace and destroy it with a Thunderbolt. Other Pokemon like Rotom in all of its forms and Cresselia could take hits from Gyarados and hit it back with things a setup sweeper wouldn't appreciate, like Thunder Wave from Cresselia or Will-O-Wisp and Thunderbolt from Rotom. Things that could take an Ice Fang well like Celebi and Tangrowth could also stop Gyarados if it doesn't have bounce. Also, water types with Hidden Power Electric became a problem for Gyarados. However, since Gyarados could be played in so many ways, with the right team support, Gyarados was still a big threat to the metagame. In Gen 4 VGC, Gyarados saw a decent amount of usage being used as Intimidate support. Gyarados could be used to intimidate its opponents since Intimidate hits both opposing Pokemon at once. It could Dragon Dance to deal more damage, or it could carry Taunt in order to stop other support Pokemon like Dusknoir in their tracks. Gyarados could deal a good amount of damage with Waterfall even if it was played bulky, which was usually the case. Unfortunately, Gyarados as a support had bad matchups against top threats like Zapdos, of course, as well as Metagross since Clear Body is unaffected by Intimidate. Since Metagross was used a lot, most players would appreciate and Intimidate when fighting against it. Gyarados usually carried a Wakan Berry in order to survive electric damage, or a Lum Berry in order to avoid being status. Alright, Gen 5, Gyarados remained a major threat in the meta, still being able to be played bulky, offensively, or with choice items. Gyarados benefited from the abundance of rain teams as well as the addition of hidden abilities, since now, depending on what the team needs, Gyarados could also utilize the ability Moxie, which increases its attack stat by 1 stage after knocking out a Pokemon. This ability could allow it to snowball a lot faster, though if Moxie didn't pique your interest, Intimidate was still very good too. Intimidate with Substitute allowed it for safer setting up versus Pokemon like Scizor and Mamoswine. Once again, Gyarados' defenses allowed it to withstand many things like neutral ice attacks. With the Substitute up, it could avoid being status, revenge killed, or hit by a Volt Switch. Directly countering Gyarados was difficult, but it still had a number of weak matchups. Ferrothorn, Skarmory, and Rotom Wash had very good matchups versus Gyarados due to their bulk and ability to stop Gyarados from sweeping by burning it, phasing it, or draining it. Kyurem Black and Porygon 2 could also take hits from Gyarados and feint it with an electric move. Also, anything that could outspeed Gyarados even after a Dragon Dance was a decent matchup like Scarf, Thundurus, Jolteon, and Terrakion. And of course, Stealth Rocks was still a nuisance for it, though Gyarados' sheer amount of options made it a very potent threat during Gen 5. In Gen 5 VGC, Zapdos was still Gyarados' bane. It did see some decent usage as Intimidate support once again, especially with the advent of more physical attackers. With access to support moves like Taunt, Thunder Wave, and Icy Wind, players were able to utilize Gyarados to do damage as well as cripple Pokemon by reducing their attack or slowing them down. Since Gyarados isn't that fast, Thunder Wave and Icy Wind sure helped a lot. Taunt is able to cripple setup Pokemon like Cresselia and Dusclops once again. Teammates like Weavile with its stab ice moves can take out either Zapdos or Thundurus. Gyarados could also be partnered with a flying type or anything that can avoid Earthquake. If only Zapdos and Thundurus weren't around, Gyarados would be doing a lot better. It also has to watch out for rock types who are able to KO it, or Pokemon like Gastrodon and Abomasnow who resist water type moves. Finally, Gen 6, Gyarados, unfortunately, though still a good Pokemon, wasn't used nearly as much as Gen 5. Unfortunately, the meta had generally favored speedy threats and priority users which could outspeed Gyarados even after a Dragon Dance. Regular Gyarados, though having decent matchups against threats like Mew, Gliscor, Heatran, and Amoonguss, could only take them on if it had a substitute up, because otherwise it could easily get status. As for Mega Gyarados, given a massive 155 base attack stat and a dark typing, Gyarados was able to deal massive damage to threats like Jirachi, Slowbro, and Latias with Crunch, as well as Heatran, Clefable, and Mega Lopunny with Waterfall. Ice Fang also allowed it to hit Breloom, Amoonguss, Mega Altaria, and Garchomp. Thanks to its ability Mold Breaker as a Mega, it could even hit Rotom Wash with an Earthquake. Though unfortunately, Fighting types and Fairy types now gave Gyarados a problem thanks to its dark typing, as well as of course Electric types to both forms of Gyarados. Since priority users and Choice Scarf users became so commonplace, Pokemon like Talonflame, Landorus T, Kyurem Black, Mach Punch users, and prankster Pokemon like Klefki and Thundurus could also stop Gyarados very well. Also, once again, Stealth Rocks, and now Spikes if it Mega Evolves, are able to wear down Gyarados as it switches in. In Gen 6 VGC, Gyarados, as well as Mega Gyarados, were utilized similar to the past two VGC metas. Investing into HP and defense allows regular Gyarados to survive hits from Mega Kangaskhan, who was one of the biggest threats in the meta, as well as survive a Rock Slide from Garchomp. If running a full offensive set with Choice Band, Stone Edge is able to wreck common threats like Talonflame, Mega Charizard Y, and Rotom Heat. As for Mega Gyarados, it could intimidate opposing Pokemon and then Mega Evolve in order to utilize the higher attack stat. Thanks to Mold Breaker, Mega Gyarados could destroy Rotom Wash, who was also another very common Pokemon. To take advantage of its power, Dragon Dance was used in order to set up and deal massive damage. Both Gyarados appreciated a teammate who could deal with electric types well, such as Garchomp or Rotom Heat. Amoonguss was also a good check to Rotom Wash and could redirect electric type attacks away from Gyarados. Gyarados was checked by Ferrothorn, especially if it Mega Evolves, Rotom Wash, and Amoonguss. Just like before, it definitely did not appreciate being burned. Though despite this, Gyarados was definitely a threat in doubles thanks to its offensive prowess and decent bulk. And that's it. So how did Gyarados do? Gyarados was pretty good. For singles, it had a rough start in the beginning because of its lack of access to good stab moves, but really picked it up during Gens 3, 4, and 5. Though it wasn't a top threat in Gen 6, it was still quite powerful and could find its place on a lot of teams. Unfortunately, it was a bit mediocre when faced against other faster Pokemon. Hopefully, it picks itself up in Gen 7. As for Doubles, it found its place in a meta for every generation in VGC, and its ability combined with its decent bulk and high attack power allowed it to thrive. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked the video, please subscribe to False White Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and of course comment on what Pokemon you want for the next video. Alright, that's all I got. Peace out, everyone.